Hello everyone, hope you're having a great day. Today, we're diving into an incredible story, a story of grit, love, failure, and triumph. James, a young man who started from nothing, just won $1 million construction bid. But right when he thought life was finally turning around, a single mistake almost cost him everything. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next episode. And meanwhile, far away from the chaos of contracts in concrete, Tu Diep, the quiet, resilient woman by his side, continued to sell baskets of vegetables at a small village market. Behind James's glowing success was a garden of sweat, tears, sleepless nights, and the kind of decisions that make your heart race. Let's rewind a little. James was a dreamer, a young man with no family backing, no financial cushion, and no big-name connections. But through sheer effort and belief, he somehow landed $1 million construction project. It was the kind of win that felt like a fairy tale, until the nightmare began. Just a week after signing the contract, James faced his first disaster. The blueprints provided by his partners were riddled with errors, major errors. If the team followed them, the entire building structure could be compromised. That discovery halted everything. With the project now at a standstill, James called for an emergency meeting with his lead architect and site engineers, only to find out that the key supervisor had suddenly taken personal leave. Before he could react, another blow came in. The price of steel he had pre-ordered jumped by 20%, and the supplier hesitated to deliver on time. Panic started to ripple through the team. Some whispered about quitting. Others started quietly pulling out. And then it happened. A construction worker, unaware of a weak foundation section, accidentally caused a concrete wall to collapse. No one was hurt, but the damages ran into the hundreds of millions of dong. The pressure, the numbers, the delays, they all piled on like bricks on James's chest. That night, James sat alone on the dusty site, his mind spinning with red numbers and looming deadlines. He pulled out his wallet, almost by reflex, and found a worn photo inside, a picture of him and Tu Diep smiling beside a tiny garden. "We can't stop here," James whispered. That very night, he grabbed a pen and paper and restructured everything. He cut unnecessary costs, found a new supplier, and decided to personally oversee every single team on site. Then, he picked up the phone and called Tu Diep. "I'm in deep trouble," he confessed, "but I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to believe I can." Tu Diep didn't say much. She just showed up the next day. Under the blazing sun, she arrived with 2 lunchboxes and a small umbrella. She sat next to James, surrounded by tangled scaffolding and cement dust. She didn't lecture or give pep talks. She simply gave him her presence, her calm, and her quiet trust. From that moment, something shifted in James. He rolled up his sleeves, put on a reflective vest and hard hat, and became a different kind of leader. Not the kind who gave orders from a cool office, but the kind who showed up every day at 6 a.m. and stayed till the stars came out. He walked the site, corrected mistakes with his own hands, scolded careless workers, and sometimes even lifted heavy loads himself. His boots were covered in mortar dust. His arms were sunburned. But his eyes, they burned with something new, determination. Realizing the cash flow couldn't keep up, James made a bold move. He sold his only car. That money bought just enough material to keep the project going. Then he renegotiated with his suppliers, convincing them to split payments in stages. There was no turning back now. James made hard calls. He let go of people who weren't committed. He hired young engineering interns, saving money while also bringing in fresh energy. Most importantly, he brought the entire team together for a meeting. But this time, it wasn't to yell. It was to speak from the heart. Standing in front of over 30 workers, his voice cracked but stayed strong. "I won't promise to make you rich, but if we finish this together, every ounce of your effort will be worth it. This project won't just be a job, it will be something we can all be proud of." For the first time, the applause wasn't out of politeness. It was out of belief. From that day forward, something magical happened. The engineers worked closer together. The workers stayed late voluntarily. At night, James stayed up until 2 or 3 a.m., redrawing progress charts, triple-checking the budget, and emailing foreign suppliers, in broken English, but full of effort. Within just a month, the project was back on track. The foundation was poured with precision. Progress reached nearly 80%. A local media team caught wind of the story, a young man clawing his way back from the edge of bankruptcy, and aired it on a local TV station. The footage of James barking orders with a dirt-streaked face and wiping sweat with his sleeve moved thousands of viewers. Suddenly, investors were calling. People began noticing his name. The project that seemed doomed was rising, firm and tall, one steel beam at a time. But more than the building, James was rebuilding himself. Stronger, sharper, and humbler. Meanwhile, as James fought his battles with concrete and cash flow, Tu Diep quietly carried on her own journey. Every morning, she slipped on her conical hat, grabbed a basket, and walked barefoot through the rows of her little garden. She harvested cabbage, cut squash, and picked eggplants with calloused hands and a quiet smile. Even though her clothes were soaked with sweat and her hands stained with soil, Tu Diep's eyes always carried a simple, radiant joy. She loaded her vegetables onto her old scooter and rode to the village market. It wasn't easy. Customers often complained that her prices were higher than other stalls. Some turned away, shaking their heads. But Tu Diep didn't give up. Patiently, she explained to each shopper, "These vegetables haven't been touched by pesticides or chemical fertilizers. I only use well water and organic compost made from banana peels and green beans." At first, people were skeptical, but slowly, her sincerity won them over. Young mothers looking for safe food for their children, elderly vegetarians seeking clean produce, they started coming to her little stall more and more. But they didn't just buy vegetables, they stayed to chat. They asked her about how to prepare the soil, how to keep bugs away using garlic and ginger, how to grow food with love and care. Tu Diep became more than a seller. She became a teacher, a friend, a quiet inspiration. At night, when James was finally asleep after a long day of site inspections and budgeting battles, Tu Diep sat alone at her wooden table. She sketched plans to expand the garden, imagined new trellises for gourds and turmeric, and outlined her dream to one day open a free gardening class for the children in her village. She envisioned a future where clean, local produce from their small, forgotten town would sit proudly on supermarket shelves, served on family tables in big cities. Not because they were mass-produced, but because they were honest, natural, and filled with care. And perhaps the most beautiful part? Even though James and Tu Diep were fighting on different front lines, one with cement and contracts, the other with seeds and soil, they were always silently walking together, like two rivers flowing separately but destined to meet in the same vast ocean. They shared the same dream: to build something meaningful from the ground up, using nothing but hard work and relentless faith. As the construction site began to flourish, James finally had a moment to breathe. The foundation was strong. The framework stood tall. The project was gaining attention from investors and engineers nationwide. He had built something others believed would fail. But deep down, he knew I didn't do it alone. One evening, he invited the entire crew for a small gathering. No suits, no speeches, just food, music, and laughter beneath the half-finished beams of their shared creation. In front of everyone, he raised a glass and said, "This building isn't just made of bricks and concrete. It's made of second chances, made of sleepless nights, honest hands, and people who refused to give up. I wouldn't be here without Tu Diep, and I wouldn't still be standing without all of you." There was silence for a moment, and then the place erupted in cheers. Meanwhile, back in the village, Tu Diep's garden had become a small wonder. Children from the neighborhood came every weekend to help and learn. They laughed as they pulled carrots from the ground and painted signs for rows of lettuce. One child with dirt on his face and a wide grin asked, "Miss Tu Diep, can I grow a pumpkin taller than me?" She smiled and replied, "Of course. If you care for it every day, it will grow just like you." Soon, Tu Diep started packing her vegetables into neatly labeled boxes. With the help of a friend in the city, she began delivering them directly to customers who wanted healthy, organic produce. Orders trickled in slowly at first, but each message of thanks made her heart swell with pride. On weekends, when James came back to the village, he and Tu Diep would walk through the garden together. He'd run his hands along the leafy greens and admire the neat rows of herbs. She would tease him about how dirty his shoes still were. He'd joke that her cucumbers were overachievers. But when words faded, they often stood in silence, hand in hand, under the stars. Two dreamers who had survived their storms and were now sowing something new together. Months later, the construction project was completed. Ahead of schedule and under budget. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by city officials, journalists, and even some investors from abroad. James stood on the stage, confident, proud, but still humble. In the front row, Tu Diep watched quietly, holding a small bouquet of garden herbs tied with string. She didn't wear makeup, didn't wear fancy clothes, but when James looked out at the crowd, his eyes found her first, and his smile lit up the whole day. That night, he didn't go to a celebration dinner or cocktail event. He drove straight home, back to the village. Under the same sky where everything had started, he placed his arm around Tu Diep and whispered, "We did it." And they had. They had proven that success isn't about shortcuts or flashy wins. It's about endurance, humility, and love. James had built more than just a building. He had built a life with purpose, with partnership, and with a woman who never left his side. And Tu Diep, from her tiny garden, had planted more than vegetables. She had planted hope, not just for herself, but for a whole community. This wasn't just a story of surviving. It was a story of becoming, of two souls one who built upwards with steel and sweat, and one who grew roots deep in the earth, rising together. And if you're still listening, still watching, maybe this is the reminder you needed. No matter how different your paths are, when hearts beat for the same dream, you're never really walking alone. James, a young man who starts with nothing, wins a $1 million construction contract, a dream come true. But soon after, design flaws, rising material costs, and a site accident threaten to destroy everything. As he struggles to hold the project together, his partner Tu Diep quietly supports him while continuing to sell organic vegetables in their rural village. Through grit and teamwork, James leads his crew back from near collapse, rebuilding both the site and himself. Meanwhile, Tu Diep turns her garden into a thriving, meaningful venture. Despite walking different paths, construction and farming, they remain deeply connected, each inspiring the other. Together, they show that true success isn't about wealth or status, but about perseverance, love, and building something greater than themselves, side by side.